So welcome, everyone, to the Catholic Entrepreneur Podcast. I'm Matt Pinto. Really, at the end of the day, the purpose of this podcast is to bring together two worlds, the faith world and the business world. The church uses more erudite words, the sacred and the profane. Profane meaning kind of everyday life. I think this is really one of the best topics to begin this whole new podcast. And the topic is what the Catholic Church can learn from the business world and vice versa, what the business world can learn from the church. My guest is someone I've become acquaintances with maybe 8 years, somewhere in that range, because of the circles that we both walk in. Tom Corcoran, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, man.
So let me tell you a little bit about Tom, someone who really saw something along with Father Michael White. They saw something that was happening outside the church, and they saw what was happening in our own Catholic Church, and they did something about it. And I'll tell you about that in just a minute. Tom is the president of Rebuilt Parish. 20 years ago, did something very bold and went through a great renewal. Tom, along with Father Michael White, is spearheading that. Tom is the author of 6 books. He's a graduate of Loyola. Is that in Maryland?
In Maryland, yeah.
Very good, very good. So Tom is helping the church nationwide do some really, really great things. And Tom spoke on this topic at a conference that I ran. And again, our topic today is what the church can learn from business and vice versa, what business can learn from the church. So Tom, that was a big long intro. Maybe I get away with it at one of these early podcasts, but again, welcome. Tom, first off, when you thought of the idea of doing that talk, what the church can learn from business and vice versa, how did that come about when you were going to deliver it at the conference that you did for me?
Yeah, it probably came from my own personal experience because as I started out, probably, as a young person, didn't probably have a lot of respect for business. My mom worked in the church. My dad was an accountant, but kind of in the business world. But I always felt like he really wanted to be in the nonprofit world, quite honestly. A lot of my friends, I thought they were going into the business world from Loyola or from high school. I thought were a little bit too consumed with money. Or I thought if I wanted to make an impact in the world, so I thought business was not the way to do that. I just thought it was kind of a lesser calling. I guess I would say it that way.
In a pre-interview, you actually said to me that you looked down on business.
Yeah, I probably did. I did look down, and I looked down just because I thought, be about higher ideals. And I guess I've been an idealist for a long time, so that's part of it.
Do you think it's common that those of us who work within the church, whether diocese, parish, or lay level, that it's common that we look down on business?
I think there is. I think again, it's a mix. I don't want to, broad brush too much, but it's definitely in there. I think that you might look at business leaders as successful or having more means and that kind of thing. And maybe, as a church worker or working in the church, you don't have all those means, or, it's not always looked great. Oh, you work at a parish, that's great. Whereas business can feel like a little more highly valued. So it's sort of like a reverse there, that somehow maybe you start to look down on that or not value it. And as we'll obviously talk about, it needs to change.
So you delivered a talk, what the church can learn from business and vice versa. Something changed. What changed? Why did it change?
Well, so I've worked in a parish now for 26 years. And so, but the transformation that really took place at our church came when we realized things weren't working. We were working really hard, but we like to say everything was the same after as before. Mm-hmm. So that started Father Michael and myself on a journey to try to say, okay, where is the church working? Where is it succeeding? And we were willing to learn from anybody, even Protestant churches. And as we actually studied them, they often introduced us to business principles. So, like the Willow Creek Leadership Summit, people might be familiar with that, would bring business leaders in, or even if you hear Rick Warren would quote Peter Drucker. And we would get introduced to these leaders and realize, we need to, this is information, this is knowledge, this is wisdom, this is understanding we don't have that we desperately need if our parish is going to succeed in our mission.
So Nativity Church, Father White, yourself, discovered another kind of bias that they were uncomfortable in maybe early days, maybe even presently, with the Church in the Nativity looking to the evangelical world for things. A, was that the case? And B, why were you comfortable with still doing that?
I think it is. I try not to think about it too much, but we know it's out there. Yeah, why do I feel comfortable? I think first of all, the Catholic means universal, and truth is truth, and wherever truth is found, we need to as Catholics, we should be bringing it in. So when it comes to learning from Protestantism, there are separated brethren. If anyone knows anything about Father Michael Scanlon, who changed Steubenville, turned it around.
Yeah.
He turned it around from learning from many Protestants. I think that gets lost in the understanding of Steubenville's history. Read his book. It's right there. If anything's growing, and we can learn from it. And so I think people who are willing to learn from wherever they can usually find greater success. And I'm very comfortable in my Catholic faith. I totally believe it. So
Sure. As a Catholic, one of the teachings that you and I subscribe to is the incarnation, God becoming man. Mm-hmm. In really thinking about God becoming man, to me, one of the things that is an affirmation of the created world. We've heard the words in Genesis, in the beginning it was very good. Ergo, the things of the world are morally neutral or positive goods. Is that kind of how you see not only the question of whether you should take some ideas from the evangelical world, but this question of the business world being able to teach? Do you think there's a connection there between, again, the incarnation, God affirming the created world, and how you and I view the created world?
Absolutely, yeah. And I go a lot to everything created is good, even though when we'll talk about money, some people say money's neutral. I think money's good. Like, I think money's a good that helps, commerce, right? So business leaders need to see that as a good, and if you are called into that by God. We see business principles throughout the scriptures, throughout in the Old and New Testament. Paul, Jesus constantly uses business principles to illustrate and help us understand the kingdom of heaven. So yeah, absolutely, it is a good. And so that is a transformation, I would say, that's happened when it comes to my own thinking, and I've repented. So
got it. We're going to talk about money as one of the principles, but I want to ask you, if you still wrestle with the balance, the tension now, as Church of the Nativity. For example, I used to say to people, Ascension was a for-profit, and we did well. We grew big and all that stuff. And then you're faced with a dilemma. Well, we have some resources here. But I had guardrails, and I want to get your opinion on the guardrails. In one sense, you've turned my father's house into a marketplace. Mm-hmm. But then on the other side, you have the parable of the talents, where the person with 3 and the person with 5 were praised for industriousness.
Right.
And so do you still kind of experience these tensions, you, Father Mike, and the leadership team, about when you're kind of maybe feeling a little too secular or pushing too secular versus the sacred? Do you still live in these tensions?
Yeah, I think so. I think you were doing your introduction about business leaders leading the tension. I think church, we live in the tension too. And I think, I've heard other people say you got to embrace the tension. The tension is even good. Yeah. And the tension's not to be run away from. So tension's how we grow. Tension's how muscles grow. Tension means we understand kind of competing values, and that they have to be held in tension, that we don't want to fall to either one side. We become, again, with the church, if we can become too isolated from people, or we can, become too much like the world, right? Be of the world, be in the world, but not of it, right?
Sure. I heard an analogy one day that I thought was interesting. And are you a football guy?
I am.
Yeah. So I watch football as well, and I'm sure there's a few times in a game when you see the clash, mm-hmm. and you think, oh my goodness. Well, I had a professional coach say to me one time, he was very gracious, if you were actually there in the tension, on the offensive line, defensive line, you just couldn't even believe. And so what I'm getting at with this is that it's in the tension, strangely, that actually virtue can grow. And without that tension, mm-hmm. you might not have an opportunity. Some persons may want to shun all potential dangers and threats of the potential occasion of sin, but there are times it's precisely within that tension that you grow more than if you didn't have that challenge at all.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny. I feel like there's some things going on in my life right now where there's tension, there's pressure, there's pushing, and even sometimes our staff, I think when they say that, like, well, I'm being overwhelmed, or I'm being pushed. And I was thinking I need to come back, because even as that, I'm praying on my way up, and I'm like, oh, God's using this. I have to press into God in this time. And so, when there's tension, when there's difficulty, there's challenges, how we grow, right? So growing in faith is exactly those times of tension and pressure. And the trial is not bad. The trial is good. It takes us to the next place in our faith.
Sure. So, Tom, what I'm hoping to do, because we got a lot of ground to cover with your 5 and your 5, and again, 5 lessons the church can learn from business, and then we're going to do the vice versa. So if you could just give us the highest level of where we're going on the 5, and then we'll unpack them, and then we'll flip over the other side. By the way, this is a free giveaway that we're working from today, but we're going to give it away to you for free. I think you're going to like these notes. I'll tell you how to do that at the end of the show. So, Tom, if you can give us a high level, and then we'll unpack each of them.
Yeah, so what the church can learn from business is, one, that money matters. We've kind of started to touch on that a little bit, but we can definitely go a lot deeper.
Sure.
Embrace a lively sense of deadline.
Okay, that's number 2.
Yeah, the importance of measurement data when it comes to success.
Okay, number 3.
I like number 4. I say is the product matters, which might offend some church people, and then number 5, marketing matters. That we need to market our products well.
Okay, so this is where we're going here. Money matters, a sense of urgency, deadline, measured data. The product matters and marketing matters. And so, again, as you just kind of alluded to, those words might be a little anathema to someone who comes from a church perspective. But quite frankly, either they don't care enough or they haven't been beat up enough if you don't see the need for some of these.
Yeah. And like you said, if you're the entrepreneurial type person in the church, then you probably would agree with these. But we'll work through them too. And I can.
Sure. And before we start on the first one, talk someone off a ledge right now who hears these words, who loves the church, believes that just like there are higher ideas, there are also higher things in church. There are things that are sacred that should remain sacred and cared for in precious earthen vessels. But what would you say to someone who might hear these 5 and might have an initial reaction? What would you say to that strong believing Catholic who gets a little nervous about this?
And hopefully as we dig into each, that helps with that. And First of all, I agree with what you're just saying. There's still the sacred. When David writes Psalm 23, right? He's a shepherd. He understands God as a shepherd because that's his work and that's what he's doing every day. And in the same way, I think in America, they say the business of America is business, right? That's kind of the way we understand the world. It's a framing of the world. Mm-hmm. So God works through cultures. That's the way he does. So I think we got to be comfortable with that.
Got it. Okay. So what do you mean by money matters?
Yeah. So again, if you go back to my experience and even again, looking down on people who are just goal was to make money. And at the end of the day, really, we need higher ideals about money and we'll look at that. But money does matter. I like what John Maxwell says, where there is no vision, the people perish. Where there is no money, the vision perishes. So money's needed to fuel the church. I think in the church, people, it gets a rap, like all they do is ask for money. I think the reason we get that rap is because we ask for it badly, or we nag about it. And that's what I mean specifically. And because we're not comfortable with it. So for the church, we just need to get more comfortable with the topic of money. Mm-hmm. And, it's funny, I think even with talking with maybe high net worth people or talking about, they know if I try to tell other people that are doing, they know that you're going to ask eventually for it and you need that, but that's okay. The point hopefully is relationship first and then that, but be okay, be comfortable with that. Be comfortable with asking people for money and inviting people to give. Jesus talked about money all the time. The scriptures are full of ways in which to approach money if we'll just dig into that. But as the church just needs to be more comfortable talking about money and being with its people and just that it is needed for our vision as a church.
So obviously the verse that's often thrown around is it's quoted incorrectly. Money is the root of all evil.
Right. Yeah. So, Pink Floyd said that, not the God, but
Pink Floyd said that.
Yeah.
So what do you say to the one who kind of gets that phrase wrong, or you still know the sentiment of what they're saying? What do you say to that person who the love of money is the root of all evil?
Right. That's the correct one. Right. Yeah. Look, greed is an issue, right? It is in the heart, and Jesus said the number one competitor for people's hearts is money, right? You cannot serve both God and mammon, right? So it is a competitor. That's right. But again, I think it's still good. And again, if as much as there's warnings against money in the Bible and making it an idol, and Paul calls it that at times, the other thing is though there's constant, and it is a little subtler, but again, Jesus uses parables about money. He wants us to use it wisely. But again, he says, Timothy, Paul says, teach those who are rich. He doesn't say teach those who are rich to get rid of all their money. He says teach those to not count on it, and then to become generous, to be rich in a good way. So we see constant examples in Scripture of people who funded ministry that was needed. My daughter's Lydia, right? You sold purple garments. You sold purple garments to people who had money because they were wealthy. It was an expensive garment. Jesus in Luke 8, it says he brings some women with him who are in the upper echelon of society because they funded his ministry. Yeah. So, I think there's this falsehood that, money is evil. Again, money is evil, that money is bad, it's to be avoided, or it's a necessary evil, and that, Jesus was totally against money. No, he just was against, he wanted us to use it wisely.
Got it.
In our own best interest.
Great. The second one, what do you have?
So I talk about the sense of urgency here and a lively sense of deadline. And this is something Father Michael, I remember very early on in my tenure at Nativity. I was like 25 years old when I started at Nativity, and he was, a younger pastor, a new pastor, and he was trying to learn from anywhere he could. And he would find articles in the newspaper, and I can't remember if it was Harvard Business Review or where this came from, but he puts on an article on our desk and to read, and we discuss that successful organizations, and I think business have a clear understanding of this, have a lively sense of deadline. And obviously for people in the corporate world or in the public companies, you got to report every 90 days, so they feel that. But even that, you need to hit deadlines and get things done or you're going to be out of business. The church tends to be like, well, we'll get it done when we'll get it done. And, we didn't make that deadline. That's okay. And that can seep very easy into a church culture if we're not careful. So
Sure. I've observed before that if some practices or ethoses of church cultures were in the secular world, that they would get fired.
Right. Yeah. So some of it, I think it's in individuals to say, what are you going to do? What are you going to accomplish by a certain date? Like setting goals, and obviously we don't always hit those goals, and that's okay, but we got to create that sense of urgency that what we do really matters. And
sure.
People's lives are at stake. I really believe, people knowing God and their eternal destiny and even not just for eternal destiny today, hopefully knowing Jesus today makes a difference in your life. So we have an important mission, which we'll get to, and it matters, and we need to move with a sense of urgency.
Sure.
And not slowly.
Do you think maybe the malaise, or maybe it always was this way, is rooted in the loss of an understanding of the higher things, that heaven and hell are real? People want go there, and but we've lost the sense of the intensity of the game, if you will, and therefore, we don't feel no burning need to get something done. You think it's rooted in that?
I think there's some part of that for sure. I think that, again, if people who really believe in heaven and hell, and maybe the theology I don't always agree with, but whose views on it, we got to tell people that Jesus do move with that sense of urgency often. Sure. I do think sometimes too, as churches, we settle for maybe people, or we don't have people in leadership that are pushing it and saying we need to be moving forward, and it's not, and creating cultures that do move and get things done, and not just accept, well, somebody needs a job, so we'll let them work at the church, right? That's just, we can't move forward without people in the right seats and who do have a kind of sense of urgency in their hearts.
Let's address this third one: measuring data and results matter. What are you saying? Why are you saying it?
Yeah, again, I think at church, often it can settle in, and this goes back to the other one. Well, 10 people show up, 10 people always show up, right? Well, that's not good enough, and we need more. Or databases, it was a big learning for me, the importance of a database in our organization. And I remember thought, this is kind of unimportant. What do we need? All right, fine, whatever database. But we went through a whole process. We brought some people on. And now we have, this is many years ago, when we brought someone in who knows how to run the database, understands the data. Now we can
give us an example. Three.
Yeah. So one of the things we track, we have 5 steps of discipleship we talk about in Nativity that we want everybody to take, and we can kind of track pretty well who's engaged in that. And so recently we just did a push to get people in small groups. That's one of our big steps. And we wrote a book called Rebuilt Faith. And so the idea was everybody reads the book, you hear a homily about it, and you get in a small group and have a conversation. Well, our kind of goal for that was to get people who had not really engaged with us in any way, the people just kind of sitting in the pews, to take that step. I was talking to Brandon, our CFO and our technology, and he's in the data, and he's saying, the people who took that step, and I actually need a percentage from him on this, but I'm like, because I was pushing, I'm like, well, what's the percentage? He's like, but more people were actually taking a second step of discipleship. They were already engaged with us and they got involved. So that's still good. We got 1,200 new people to step up into small groups. Now we know that. But, okay, there are still people in the pews now in which we want to engage more. We got to figure out what's the next step so we can make better decisions based on that data and that kind of thing.
Sure.
So, Proverbs says, know the conditions of your flock, right? It's just knowing what's going on in our community, and the numbers, the data can help us do that.
Sure. I mean, the book of Numbers, was a census of numbers. One of my former staff members, and he said something to the effect, and I'm getting it backwards, but what you're not tracking, you're not measuring, or what you're not measuring, you're not tracking. And so I can see the value. Let's go to number 4. The product matters. I mean, first off, contextualize the phrase product. Obviously, I know you, I know your faith. We're not reducing the eternal sacrifice of the Mass that blows all our minds when we understand what it is. We're not, we're not profaning it in a sense. So tell us what you're saying here and why it matters.
Yeah, and some people might think it was the product. Jesus is above the product, I think, but what we produce at a church is really ultimately many times experiences for people, communication, right, for people. And so especially we talk about at Nativity and Rebuilt, our weekend experience. So what do people experience as they come to Mass? What do they experience in the Mass, right? So
yeah, even in the parking lot, I've been there, and you guys have figured out even how to do the parking lot. You would say, Matt, that's kind of part of the experience. It's part of the product. Yes?
Yeah. As Father Michael says, the homily or the message begins in the parking lot. Your first experience of church begins there. So our job is to lead you. We talk about progressive solemnity, that Father Michael uses that term of we get deeper and deeper to the Eucharist, but we have to lead you there. And that's our job and our role as churches, church leaders. And so, again, I would say our core product is the weekend Mass and that experience around that. And so we talk about music, message, and minister. So the ministry, you've kind of talked about that hospitality we create. Music is the music good? I mean, is it elevating? Is it inspiring people? Is it elevating their souls, or do people walk away mad and angry? Like we had music so bad at our church, we walked away angry, or people walked away angry. That's counterproductive. And then the homily, as the pastor, the priest put in energy and effort to it. That's what people come and experience, and all that matters. And we might wish that it was just the Eucharist was enough, but I like to say if the Eucharist was enough, every Catholic church in this country would be full. And that's not to say Jesus isn't enough.
Yeah.
I like to quote Colossians 1:24, where Paul says, I'm making up for what's lacking in the sufferings of Christ.
Nothing,
Nothing's lacking, but Jesus waits for our efforts. And I think, God just takes us very seriously. Like he wants us to partner with him, and he will often not do things in our world or move people's hearts if we do not partner with him. And so, it kind of goes back a little bit to like a lackadaisical attitude towards the weekend worship and Mass, and that as a church, we need to learn from businesses who understand if I want to, there are people who have bad products out there, junky products, but if you want to, survive for the long haul and really add value to people's lives, you're going to produce a product that is of value to people and help people see the value. And that's what I mean by the church needs to learn that. Sure.
And this doesn't mean even remotely that you're not saying that, no, Matt, in its essence, for example, the Eucharist or the sacred liturgy, even elements of the beauty of the Old Mass, the Latin Mass. No, it's beautiful and wonderful, but it's the objective truth. If it doesn't reach those, so it's the gap that is the deficiency, not the essence.
That's a good way to put it.
So
that's a great way to put it.
Well, as Scott Hahn said it in that Colossians phrase, he says, Christ's death on the cross was sufficient. It's the applying it to all 8 billion people in the world, how it gets there, that's where the gap is.
Right, where God uses us and chooses us, and we kind of fill in the gap and stand in the gap, and God calls us to do that. So,
very good. Let's go to the 5th one and then switch over to the opposite, what the church brings to the world. Marketing matters. Talk about that.
Yeah, so again, the same kind of idea. It might be offensive to some people, but once we do have a good product or a good experience, and we need to be telling people about it. And we need to be, as a church, we have a great opportunity to mobilize as people in our pews that they have a good experience at church to then tell friends, family members, co-workers who've become disconnected from Christ and His church about what's going on. I think now too, social media and making use of that, but the whole idea of the gospel's good news. It's a message. Mm-hmm. right? And it's a message we are to get out there. And again, businesses often understand how to get their message out there better than the church, and we need to learn from them.
Sure. I mean, I thought of the parables. The parables are a form of messaging, if you will, and presenting something. St. Paul saying, I become a Jew to a Jew, a Gentile to a Gentile for the sake of leading them to the higher truths.
Right.
I think you would say on these first five, Matt, in and of themselves, as ends unto themselves, they're deficient. But as means to an end, would that be kind of a...
Yeah. I like how you put it. I'm going to steal that. Yeah, if I use that again.
Maybe we'll switch seats at some point.
Yeah, no, because I know I might try to do this talk some other time. So yeah, I'm going to steal that.
Let's talk about 5 lessons that business can learn from the church. And I got to tell you, forgive me for this, but I love the church so much and believe that when I saw that this was part of the equation, my heart quickens a little bit again, because I love the church and properly understood, there are so many unbelievable nooks and crannies and little things that the church has that the world hasn't seen. But walk us through, just give us the highest level first, and then we'll walk through each of them, and we'll probably do them a little bit quicker than we did the other ones, just to keep an eye on the clock.
Okay.
So read each 5 first.
Yeah, so again, purpose beyond a profit, right? So money matters, but the flip side is purpose beyond a profit. The sense of urgency was what we said, the other one, but flip that, eternal perspective that business leaders need to learn. Okay. Just the importance of morality, and obviously that of ethics. The business leaders need to know that from the church.
That was number 3.
Yeah. Number 4 is servant leadership and the value of that. And number 5, just really a relationship with God that, again, and that's kind of more like why business people need the church, is ultimately we need the church to get to God.
Sure. Good. Well, let's unpack each of these. Give us a little bit on purpose beyond profit. You would, I presume, say that, Matt, clearly, if a pastor or parish staff is hyper-focused on the temporal reality of money and what it can solve, they got issues. But how else might you unpack that?
Right. So I think, again, Jesus gave the clearest mission statement ever. And unfortunately, it's not always understood even by church people, but he said, go make disciples, and even give a great vision statement of all nations, right? There it is, pretty quickly. Make disciples, that's the mission, of all nations, that's the vision, right? So obviously, the business leaders can learn with Jesus giving a very clear message, very clear mission that goes beyond the profit. And even, I think on some of these principles, business leaders do learn from them. Some of the books I've read, actually, Simon Sinek has a book, Start With Why, right? And he talks about some of the most successful businesses right now know their why and their mission, and they communicate out of that mission, and then they're successful financially. So, but again, I think to make a profit is not enough of a mission and for a business, right? I think, and businesses that are really succeeding in our world right now understand that the money matters, but if it just becomes all about the money, that's where greed and corruption comes in.
Tom, one thing I've seen in the past, at least 10 years, maybe 15 years, and it actually has, again, I'll use the phrase quickened my heart a little bit. When I see parishes have mission statements, now that may sound like eye-rolling to some people, but no. I mean, if you don't know what you're shooting for, you're really not going to reach anything. You're probably just going to wander. So, is this your sense that you're seeing more mission statements, and I presume that's a good thing in your view?
Yeah, I agree it's a good thing. I kind of go back to it. Any mission statement needs to just be a little riff off of what Jesus said, make disciples, right? That's very clear mission Jesus gave us. And sometimes we might put a little bit of language to it. But yes, I agree. We need to be mission driven, and that's the way we need to be. And as churches focus on that, and again, as long as we're doing Matthew 28, where Jesus said, I think it's 28:18, make disciples, and any riff off of that, to be pretty clear. But yes, I think it's good.
Let's talk about number 2, eternal perspective. It was the counterbalance to the number 2. On the other side, embrace a lively sense of deadline.
Right.
So juxtapose those two or unpack the eternal perspective one.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, again, the business world, oftentimes, again, if you are a public company, every 90 days, and what are the numbers saying? I mean, that's a treadmill that's exhausting, right? And you need to you need cash flow, and you need all those things that are deadline driven, and to get products out. But then obviously to pull back and say, look, Psalm 90 says, teach us to number our days. In other words, this is limited. It is a limited here, to pull back in perspective, right? Because I think for business leaders, if you make it all about the profit or all about the right now, and for any of us, right, become too focused on the now and don't have a perspective, the stress and tensions of this world will overwhelm you.
Sure.
Right. And being able to pull back and say, look, in the larger perspective of eternity, how is this impacting my soul? What's from God's perspective? How is this, as long as I'm trying to serve God and his purposes, my failure in this moment doesn't have to define me. Or again, I don't want to let the stress and tension of that urgency destroy my soul.
Got it. Let's go to number 3. Take it away.
All right. So again, just the idea of morality and becoming more like Christ. And again, if you're a Catholic or a Christian listening to this, you can understand the value of that if people are really going to be ethical, it's going to become, and you're going to have a successful business. It takes people, and to succeed, we need people who are ethical, moral, but ultimately, again, as Christians and Catholics, we say more Christ-like, that as we have people who work for us that are becoming more like Jesus, then our businesses are going to be more successful, or organizations are going to be more successful. Without Jesus' teachings, again, I think we do slip towards, again, we see immorality come, and there's greed, there's greed in the employees or selfishness in the employees, then that's going to cause a whole bunch of headaches in a business that you don't want, right?
Tom, I'm reading a quote here in your number 3, and I'd like you to kind of paraphrase it or explain it. You speak about the framers of the Constitution warned that this is a delicate experiment, ergo we need virtuous leaders. What were you hoping to amplify there?
Yeah, I think it's a quote by John Adams that said, our Constitution's only meant for virtuous people, for people who are good and pursuing good, and that it can't hold without it, because the whole idea was you don't have at that time, it was kind of a loose government in the sense of giving people freedom. And so without that, you can't have a free people. It was funny. I was at a university, and the I won't say what it is, but the quote in Latin says, out of freedom, truth. Mm-hmm. And it's actually the opposite of what Jesus said. Jesus said, out of truth, freedom.
Wow, that's
right?
Cool.
Yeah. So we do need to know the truth, right? The truth will set you free. We do need to know the truth, who is Jesus, and becoming more like him, in order to, I think, for a functioning society and a functioning business, and for there be, again, we need to build trust between organizations, and to be trustworthy, you kind of have to be competent in your character, and that means becoming more like Christ.
Sure. And the corollary here is that if our parishes are not run by virtuous leaders, Christ-like and a God-guided morality, then that delicate endeavor may not hold.
Yes. Yeah.
Let's go to number 4, servant leadership. I want to unpack this because one of my future speakers, I did a show with him, and he had a certain comment on servant leadership that maybe I'll attach to it. But what are you saying here?
Yeah, well, I think, first of all, the idea of servant leadership comes from Jesus. I mean, and it's funny in Good to Great, if you've ever read that Jim Collins kind of comes, kind of slowly to it, but almost like gritting his teeth and saying, like, yeah, we need servant leaders. And a great chapter from John Ortberg's book called Who Is This Man?, where he talks about, again, when Jesus says, if you want to be great, be a servant of all. I mean, how groundbreaking that was, right? Mm-hmm. People didn't want to be in charge. The apostles wanted to be large and in charge, not to be servants, but because they wanted the money, and they wanted possessions, and they wanted power, right? They wanted all those things that they thought came with it. And Jesus is teaching them over and over again, no, if you want to be great, you need to be a servant of all. He wasn't saying don't lead. He was saying it's got to come out of servant leadership. And so, Mark 10:45, Jesus says, for the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and give his life as a ransom for many. Now, I think, again, this is, in business circles, a lot of things, again, I quoted Jim Collins, that the idea of servant leadership, Simon Sinek wrote a book called Leaders Eat Last, of that idea is definitely in the business world, but I think they got it from Jesus. And as a church, we still need, and that's everybody, continually learn it. How do I use my authority and power that I have for good and to serve the people that have been entrusted or, underneath me, so to speak.
So get it, agreed, understand the principle. Here's a little bit of, not a pushback, but a contextualizing that I think, Tom, I've observed in the church that you and I love for 35 years, that often we see Jesus as the lamb, forgetting that he's the lion as well. So what has happened is sometimes our leadership have become sheepish, almost as if they want egalitarianism, and then the operation sputters under what I think is a broken understanding of of leadership, meaning meekness, or not meekness, or
It's kind of egalitarianism too.
egalitarian servitude.
Yeah.
So one of our other speakers that we're going to have on soon actually pushes back on certain elements of servant leadership, and he's a rock-solid Catholic, great theology, but he says, Matt, that doesn't mean that the president of the company should be emptying the trash cans. Now, if the trash can needs to be emptied
Sure.
and nobody's around, he's got to do it. I think you're talking about in spirit, not necessarily in operations, because operations require conductors and conductors who know where they're going.
Yeah, no, I think it means serving your people and making decisions that are going to benefit the people for the most good. And and at times I think when you're talking about that, so we did a homily message, and we have a team that kind of works on it for the weekend. But we were talking about shepherds, and I think in the church, the shepherds, the idea just comes, we're just going to care for everybody, compassion heart, which is definitely a value. But it was funny. So we actually have a guy on staff who has sheep. And he was talking about this about sheep. They will stay in the same place, and they will eat all the nutrients out of the ground. So there's no longer any nourishment, but they won't leave. They'll just stay there. The shepherd has to push the sheep on to go to the greener pastures, to go where there is food and nourishment. And I think, again, in the church, a lot of times, well, I'm being a shepherd. I'm caring for my people. And yes, but if you do not push them on or lead them on to the new place, they will eat the nutrients and the life out of the ground. Yeah. So it is no longer there, and there's no longer life in that what you're doing in that season or the programs you're running. You need to push sheep on, and so that is a servant leader. And so I think, ultimately, I think it gets too narrowly defined, I would say.
Yeah. By the way, Great analogy and anecdote. Your last one as we begin to bring things to a close here.
Yeah, just a relationship with God, and that's not something to learn from, but I do think, the church is not a religion, it's a revelation. We don't know who God is apart from the church, and we really can't fully become who we are called to be without the church and community. And by that, again, I mean the church, the sacraments, community, and not that we don't have a personal relationship with Christ, but if any of us, to know God, you need a community of people. You need the church, who is, again, God's people through the ages and the sacraments. And so, there's a big kind of push, and probably anyone listening to this wouldn't be in that, but, I'm going to go commune with nature. I'm going to go be by myself and my faith. And we can't get to God. The God is forming a family. And so without the church, we really can't know God in his fullness.
Got it. But connect the dot here for business proper. So why do you have this as number 5, what the business world can learn from?
Yeah, I think that's more last one's little rift or little switch. I just think business people need God. I mean, and what I want to say to business people, like, we need you in the church. We absolutely need you in your leadership. And I'm so grateful for the many business leaders at Nativity that, again, have enriched me in so many ways. And, obviously they fund the church, but enriched me personally. But again, what do I give? I can give, hopefully, maybe a deeper understanding of God and a relationship with God that just comes from me being able to focus more of my energy and effort on that.
Tom, lot of good insights here. And as you were talking a few minutes ago, I thought I need to have Tom on for other commentaries. So keep thinking. Tell Father Michael I said hello, and tell the staff keep fighting the good fight. They're really making a difference, and you're making a difference. And thanks for being on with me today.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. Thanks, Matt.
So as we close out, again, think about this. I love this principle of that God created the world. Yes, as C.S. Lewis says, it's bent, it's marred in a sense, but the marring is not its complete definition. It was created very good, and the things of the world can be very good, especially when they're leveraged for the sake of the kingdom. So Tom Corcoran put together a really neat document for us. Again, what the church can learn from business and what business can learn from the church. If you'd like a copy of this, in the show notes, you can write us at info@catholicleaders.org and also find out about what Tom is doing and about some of the things that we have coming up as well. So we speak about living in the tension. You're in the tension. Know that with God's grace, you can thrive in that tension. We will see you on our next episode. Bye.